Welcome back to algebra class, guys. So today is the first day that we are going to focus on something new. So at the end of our last unit, we had been interpreting graphs that looked like this, and we talked a lot about what was happening in each section. So if this graph is about someone's distance from home over time, we talked about, for instance, this is when the person was at home. From section A, from here to here, is when the person is leaving their home. And we talked about B and D, since they're being horizontal, being a time where they stopped moving away from home. So time was still passing down here, that's why it's horizontal, but they aren't getting any further away from home. And then finally we said right here between section D and E, that's when the person returns home, because we notice it changes direction, it starts going down. And we said towards the end that we could tell the speed from these graphs, because speed is distance, that's this green part, over time. So if we looked at how far up the y-axis they went over how long it took them to go there, we could find their speed. So let's look at the speed of these two sections, sections A and see which one is faster. In section A, she starts at 0, and she goes all the way up to here. So in terms of distance, that's 4 miles. So on the top, I'll write 4 miles. And then I want to see how long it took her. So I go down to my x-axis, this part's 0, and I notice it goes from 0 to 10. So it took her 10 minutes. Now I'm going to do the same thing with C, but I have to notice that I'm no longer starting at 0. I'm starting at 4. And then when I look to see how far up she went up to 6. So the distance traveled between 4 and 6 would be 2 miles. And I do the same thing with time. I see here that she's starting that journey, or that part of the journey, at 20 minutes, and it ends right here halfway between 30 and 40. This has to be 35. And I can tell because if I look at the beginning of the axis again, from 0 to 10, halfway in between has to be 5, which means that each of these rectangles stands for 5 minutes. So from this point to this point, 3 rectangles passed, each is 5 minutes, so that's 15 minutes. Now in order to compare these properly, I want to go ahead and simplify the first part. 4 miles, if I divide that by 2 and I divide the bottom by 2, I end up with 2 miles in 5 minutes. And when I go to look at C, I notice that I can't simplify 2 miles over 15 minutes, but clearly this is much faster. This person, or in this part of it, she went 2 miles in 5 minutes, versus in the second part where she went 2 miles, but it took her 15 minutes. And we said that we could figure this out more intuitively if we just looked at how steep the line was, meaning how close to straight up and down it went. And in fact, the steepness of a line in algebra isn't just speed. Anytime we're looking at steepness of a line, we're actually looking at what we call slope. So slope for a graph can always be measured by rise over run. So we had to look at what happened in terms of distance, that was going up, before we looked at what was happening in terms of time, that was the run part. So let's look at slope in this graph in each of these sections. We're going to look at rise over run. So in section A, I'm looking right here in section A. I'm first going to fill in a couple of things on my axis. So I know this part is 0, and I know that my horizontal axis is my x-axis, but notice they put the numbers down here. And they did this just because if they put it right here, it might be a little hard to read. But this is the x-axis. So if I'm looking for the slope of each, I'm going to look at the rise over the run for each of these sections. So in this first section, we're starting at 0 and going all the way up to 60. And I notice that each box on the y-axis represents 20 miles. So from here to here, that goes from 0 to 60. And then I look at the time that's going this direction. And I notice even though it's 2 boxes, I land on 1. So that means each of these boxes must represent half an hour. So my slope is 60 over 1, which we could simplify as just 60 for section A. Now section B in our graph up top, we said that if it's horizontal, the speed would be 0. Well, let's see if that is true for the slope part. We notice that it starts at 60 for distance and ends at 60 for distance. So that means there was no change in distance. So that means the top number would be 0. The bottom number, we can see it would be from 1 to 1.5, so that took half of an hour. But it almost doesn't matter what we write down here, because as soon as we see 0 divided by any number, we know it has to be 0. So the slope for section B is 0. Now section C, we should notice something different. This is the first time we're looking at it going down. So even though our distance starts up here at 60, it goes all the way down here to -40. I need to know the total distance. It doesn't matter if it was negative or positive. I just need to know how much distance happened. So we said each of these boxes was worth 20. So that is, let's count it this way: 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. And since it was going down, we'll make it negative. And then we look at how much time it took for that to happen. So this one started at 1.5 and went all the way to 4. So that's 1 hour, 2 hour, 2.5 hours. So -100 over 2.5. And then in our last section, we're going up again. And it looks like we started at -40 and we went up to 0. And again, we're looking at the change. So that means that is 40. And it's over 1.5 hours. So each of these is a slope. And we should notice that we have a positive slope, we have a negative slope, and we even have a slope of 0. But there's actually 4 types of slope. So a positive slope, looking from left to right, just like the way we read, always from left to right. A positive slope goes up from left to right. It might be like this, it might be even more, it might be kind of slight, but it goes up from left to right. A negative slope goes down from left to right. So it could be like this, could be like this, or it could even be more like this. But from left to right, it's going down. Now the 0 slope, we already figured out up there. It just means it's a horizontal line. It can be anywhere in the coordinate plane. It's just perfectly flat from left to right. Now undefined is the only type we haven't looked at yet. And I'll tell you, undefined means it's a vertical line. It goes straight up and down. And we can think about why this would be undefined if we thought about it in terms of this graph up here. If there's ever a time where that blue line that's supposed to be representing, I think, Iron Man's flight, if there were ever a time where instead of going down or going up, it went like this, the straight up, that would mean that in this 4 hours, he is at -40, -20, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. He's at all these places at the same time. And that's not possible. Since that's not possible, we call it undefined. And that's this one right here. So your practice is going to ask you to identify if a graph of a line is positive, negative, 0, or undefined. And then it's going to ask you to count the boxes to find the slope. So let's do a couple of practice together before you try the quizzes. So on this first one, if I asked you if this was negative, positive, 0, or undefined, you should immediately notice it's positive because it goes up from left to right. The one beneath it is also positive. This one over here, notice it goes down from left to right, so this one has to be negative. Oops, ran out of room to write that. And this bottom one is flat horizontally, so that means it has a slope of 0. Okay, in order to find slope on a graph, you need 2 good points. That means 2 points that are exactly on the line of the coordinate plane. So for instance, whoops, each one up here that we looked at, I had already marked out the section for us, but notice each of those points was exactly where these lines cross. So when we go down here, we want to pick 2 good points on this graph. So I'm going to pick this one and this one. All right, we said it's rise over run. So I'm going to look at how far up it went first. It went 1 box up. So my rise is 1. And now I need to see how far it goes over. 1, 2. It went over 2. So my slope is 1 over 2. Now, it wouldn't have mattered which points I chose as long as they're good points. If instead of those 2, let's say I chose this one right here and this one right here. So I'm going to try the exact same thing I just did. I'm looking for rise over run. Now notice I have to go straight up. I can't 1, 2, 3. I can't count over. I can't count diagonally because this isn't the exact same distance as this. So I have to count up until I'm across from the point. So my rise was 3. And now I need to count over from here to the point. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So my slope is 3 over 6. But notice 3 over 6, what does that simplify to? If I divide both of them by 3, I end up with 1/2. So it didn't matter which point I chose as long as I simplify. All right, let's try a negative one now. So I'm still going to start by finding 2 good points. I'm going to pick this one and this one. And I'm doing rise over run, but I notice immediately this one's not rising, it's going down. That's okay. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. Because it's going down, I'm going to write it as -3. And then I still need my run. I went over 1, 2. And then I check, is -3 over 2 simplified? Well, technically it's an improper fraction, but I do want to leave it in fraction form. So yes, -3 over 2. All right, let's try one more positive one. Here's a good point. Here's another good point. I'm going to start with my rise. I go up 1. And then my run, 1, 2, over 2. And that's already simplified, so my slope is 1/2. Now, if I get to this one and I forget 0, and I'm trying to count, well, I should notice that all of these are good points. Let's say I chose these. My rise is 0, because I didn't go up at all. And so then it doesn't matter that my run is 1, because 0 divided by 1 is still just 0. So that's a slope of 0. All right, you're going to practice on the quizzes. Remember, look first to see is it positive, negative, undefined, or 0. Then I want you to find 2 good points and try to count. If you notice that it's 0, know that you're going to put your negative sign with your rise. That means since you're counting down, put the negative with the number that you counted down. All right? All right, let's see how we do.